Normally they'd be dressed,
so.
like just hanging out, no shirt, just
pajamas.
like walking around the house going, hey, let me watch Boxing Friends. I haven't seen that in a while. I usually got to get out of the house at 5 a.m.
There you go.
So I feel excited. We're not to impress a brand new
Nice
audience.
of you to work on the holiday.
That's
yeah,
right.
Thank you.
You
We are
work.
working.
Okay, because it is President's Day. We've been doing presidential trivia
Oh, gosh.
all morning.
Yes,
Okay.
but I'm going to get another one wrong.
No, it's okay. These are
President
really
Garfield.
hard. What president would get up every day at 5
President Lincoln.
a.m. to practice the piano? Would get up every day.
At 5 a.m.
5
and
a.m.
practice the piano.
I'm going to go with Garfield. Who are you going with?
I'm going to go Garfield. I'm going to say, I know Truman's daughter loved to play the piano, Margaret. Harry Truman?
That's right.
Get out of here.
Harry
No
S.
way.
Truman. Now, here's your bonus.
He's totally giving you these answers. You got the last one right, too.
Here's your bonus question.
Two of them.
Harry S. Truman. What did the S stand for? His parents were torn.
Samuel.
His parents were torn between should we make it Ship, the name of a grandfather, I believe, or Solomon. So what did they decide on?
I don't know. Toba's trying to tell me something in my ear. Toba,
Harry
turn up the
S.
microphone. I can't
Truman.
hear you. Give me the answer.
It would sound like Solomon. Is that right?
As it turns out, they couldn't decide. So they just, his middle name is S.
Is S.
That's
just S.
All right, let's do this full circle. Guess who was here earlier? Who played Harry Truman on stage? In our earlier
Was
days.
here
Penn?
earlier today?
No, earlier last week, late last week, last week. Gary Sinise.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, he did a whole play on Harry S. Truman.
Anyway,
based on the book by David McCullough.
To all the people who are watching Fox and Friends today, welcome. It's a good thing to start your days with. We do the news of the day, and if you were watching 60 Minutes last night, you saw former FBI Director, Deputy Director Andrew McCabe, and he revealed that he personally ordered 2 investigations into the President of the United States because he wanted to know if the President fired James Comey to derail the Russia investigation, even though there was 0 evidence at that point.
He was worried he was going to get fired, and he said, before I get fired, I want to make sure I open up these investigations. Listen to some of the interview last night.
We talked about why the president had insisted on firing the director and whether or not he was thinking about the Russia investigation and did that impact his decision. And in the context of that conversation, the Deputy Attorney General offered to wear a wire into the White House. He said, I never get searched when I go into the White House. I could easily wear a recording device. They wouldn't know it was there. Now, he was not joking. He was absolutely serious.
Well, here we are 2 years later, and the investigation that he launched that made sure that Robert Mueller was in place and he would later get fired days before getting his pension. Now, the question is, it's not so much what does Donald Trump say or what Andy McCabe said. What does James Comey say? What does Andy McCabe say? What did Peter Strzok say? And what about Mr. Rosenstein? All I can tell you is, I don't know these guys personally, but Jim Baker told investigators that he had the impression that Deputy Attorney General had already discussed the 25th Amendment, the members of the president's cabinet, and 2 of the president's members of his cabinet were on board already. So Andy McCabe, Rosenstein keeps telling everyone, I was kidding. Who kids about that? And if you have to decide at home who to believe, there's a lot of people here who now think that Andy McCabe and Rosenstein were working together on the 25th Amendment. And Rosenstein, who still has the job, is trying to keep his job.
I thought your interview earlier, Brian, with Mark Penn was excellent. Remember, he's a former advisor to the Clintons, and he said the president fired their boss, their friend, James Comey, and so they figured out a way, they were trying to figure out a way to fire the president by getting a special counsel together to find a crime. Listen to what else he said.
Rod Rosenstein and Andrew McCabe were ticked off that James Comey was fired. And that firing triggered then this discussion of firing the president, maybe using the 25th Amendment. And you know what? They decided instead to hire a special counsel and put this investigation with a special counsel, with their friends, out of touch of the normal course of things, deliberately and without any event justifying it. There was no crime.
That's right. At that point, there was 0 evidence. And when James Comey, I believe he'd already been fired, went back in front of Congress and they said, so did you have any, when you left the FBI, was there any evidence that the president had colluded? Nope. They did have that FISA thing, though, where they used the dossier as the main tentpole regarding that, but they didn't bring that up last night. They did, however, talk about how there were a number of people at the Department of Justice and the FBI who, despite what the Constitution says regarding the 25th Amendment, they were on their own trying to figure a way to boot the next president.
A discussion of the 25th Amendment was simply Rod raised the issue and discussed it with me in the context of thinking about how many other cabinet officials might support such an effort. I didn't have much to contribute, to be perfectly honest, in that conversation, so I listened to what he had to say. But to be fair, it was an unbelievably stressful time. It was really something that he kind of threw out in a very frenzied, chaotic conversation about where we were and what we needed to do next.
Now we're going to eventually find out what goes on, because the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Lindsey Graham, from Munich, said, I'm hauling all these guys in. I'm going to put them under oath. We're going to find out who is telling the truth. Regardless, $30 million and still adding later. We have Robert Mueller and an investigation that has done nothing to move this country forward, unless, of course, you do believe that there was ultimate collusion and conspiracy, and we're about to find out soon. It's hard to come to that conclusion now. I like to add one more thing. He was caught lying 3 times by the Inspector General, who was appointed by Barack Obama. So this is a non-biased look into who Andy McCabe is. He said, "Oh, it was such a tense time, I might have misremembered." Fine. Why don't you give Michael Flynn the same deference?
Do you think Rosenstein will come out and speak? Because
or
they
pack
have
up
two
and
totally
leave.
different stories, and
Pack
he has
up
to
and
go to
leave.
work.
Rosenstein has been asked to go before Congress for the last 6 months, and at every turn, he doesn't want to be under oath. He wants to make it just a couple of people. Just maybe I'll talk to, informally to the people who head the committees. He does not want to go on the record.
He's got to say something now, don't you think?
Yes.
Well, you would think so,
Yes.
because he said he was serious. Dan Bongino saw that interview last night, and he was aghast. Watch.
If you watch that interview with open eyes and open ears, and that did not scare the hell out of you about the power of big government, and you still insist that the swamp doesn't exist, then you didn't watch the same interview I did. The discussions about using the 25th Amendment to remove President Trump from office, something Andrew McCabe and Rod Rosenstein would have no role in whatsoever. That's about physical or mental incapacitation. Clearly it doesn't apply here. And then a discussion about wearing a wire in the White House? I mean, if this was serious, this was a coup attempt. There's no doubt about it.
One of the other things was Mr. McCabe said, the president came in and right after he had fired James Comey, and he said, well, nobody liked him at the FBI. And then Scott Pelley said, well, how was he regarded there? And he said, well, everybody I knew loved him. What they didn't talk about, though, was one of the reasons, and the president gave this for a rationale for firing Mr. Comey, was the fact that during the last presidential election, James Comey inserted himself in the presidential process, which many Democrats regard as costing Hillary Clinton the election. There were Democrats and Republicans who both wanted him fired, and now this revisionist history about he was a fantastic leader. There was a lot of controversy regarding Mr. Comey at that time.
It was obvious
That's
how
why
much
the
he liked
president
Comey, how much he doesn't like Rosenstein, because he's saying these things about him, about the wire, and revealing that. What was your overall feeling of the interview?
I thought
A lot of questions missing.
And I thought you're the best point, where I don't think Scott Pelley's been following the story closely.
No,
It's
he
as
didn't
if he
ask the
read a couple of
follow-ups.
books and keeps up with it and watches MSNBC and feels as though he understood the story. He did not understand. Where was the question about Peter Strzok and Lisa Page and
Fusion
Comey and
GPS,
Baker and
Betty,
Fusion? Where was all
or-
this? Say, listen, before you go after the president, what a mess of the house do you have?
What
And more about collusion.
The one question, Mr. McCabe, according to Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, they went into your office, Andy's office, to
I
talk
know.
about the insurance policy.
That's right.
What was the insurance policy? Where was that question, Scott Pelley?
Right.
Just saying.
It was a 30-minute interview. I'm sure they sat down together for several hours. They only aired 30 minutes.
Right, I think you're right, but I did watch the overtime, and I didn't see that in
there.
the overtime.
Anyway.
I got the app.
So anyway, it's something we're talking about.
Yeah,
Meantime,
you can read his book.
I
Jillian,
guess so.
it's right. It's coming out tomorrow. Jillian's got some headlines right now.
That's right, and you guys have spent some time talking about this morning, but if you are just joining us, there are new questions this morning about the alleged racist and homophobic attack on Empire actor Jussie Smollett. Chicago police want to talk to him again, but say he is no longer considered a victim in the case. Two brothers, once persons of interest, were released by police without charges. Smollett's attorneys denying allegations that the attack was a hoax. The case could reportedly go to a grand jury. We will keep you updated. A wave of protests against protecting the southern border happening across the country today. President Trump's national emergency declaration prompting more than 240 President's Day demonstrations. Some 10,000 people expected to march. Organizers are urging Congress to terminate the declaration. NASCAR star Denny Hamlin races into the history books, winning the Daytona 500 for the second time.
This time, Denny Hamlin wins his second Daytona 500 and wins it for Coach Gibbs in Toyota.
His victory coming after a fiery crash took out nearly half the field with just 10 laps to go. Hamlin dedicating his win to former racing executive J.D. Gibbs, who died from a neurological disease last month. Big congrats to him.
What a race.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, Jillian.
Thank you so much.
All right, meanwhile, it's a free-for-all. One town giving everyone $500, no strings attached. But our next guest says there's no way this is going to work, exclamation point.
Plus, the Harlem Globetrotters show off a few tricks. The half-court performance with Reese Witherspoon.
What?
Coming up.
Awesome. Over 100 low-income residents, $500 a month, no strings attached, to try to combat poverty. Big question is it going to work? Maddie Duppler is a senior fellow at the National Taxpayers Union. As you can see, she's working on this President's Day. Maddie, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Okay, so it's not a real universal basic income thing that Stockton's doing. It's very limited. Is it going to work?
That's exactly right, Steve. I think that Stockton probably knows. They've seen some of these other examples around the globe from universal basic income programs that haven't worked at all. So they've created a very targeted, narrow program. It's not really a UBI program at all. What it does is it affects about 4% of the population in Stockton. It goes, this $500 they're giving out only goes to people below a certain median income, which is actually the opposite of a UBI program. A UBI program says everyone, regardless of income, regardless of employment,
universal.
gets a payout. The thinking being that this gets rid of the disincentives for people who are getting aid to not find work. Now, in Finland and in Canada, they've tried these programs and they have found the opposite to be true. They have found that by paying people not to work, you don't create any incentives to attach people to the workforce anymore. So that creates some problems.
Well, here's the thing, Maddie. If it were successful and everybody got, let's say, $500, $1,000 per month not to work, eventually. Nobody's going to be able to put the money in to pay the people the $500 or $1,000 a month.
That is an interesting solution to a problem that we have. You know, it's amazing to me. Proponents of a UBI program, they say that this is a way to get rid of inequality and to help people who can't work. But you look at the examples of places that have tried this, that have really robust social safety nets, and they even say that this does nothing to try and correct those inequalities. And everywhere, Finland and Canada, as I mentioned before, that have tried these programs have canceled them because they have shown to be ineffective.
Well, we're going to monitor the situation out in Stockton and see how it turns out. Maddie, one other thing, there's a story about, the Green New Deal. It's going to remake everything, every building. The studio I'm in, the one you're in, going to have to be retrofitted.
Yeah.
They have estimated that would cost close to $2,000 per apartment in New York City just to install LED light bulbs.
Just to screw in a light bulb, $2,000 an apartment. And listen, this is probably a pretty modest estimate if you look at the rest of the Green New Deal, which really calls for getting rid of all of our energy infrastructure and replacing it with greening infrastructure. And, we have an example for this. President Obama's stimulus plan in 2009 created a lot of incentives to try and green up federal buildings. And what we saw was exorbitant costs and not a lot to show for it. I mean, look, perfect examples in California. The fact that the high-speed rail was just canceled after 10 years of delays and absolutely no rails being put into the ground shows you exactly how efficient some of these federal regulations are when they come to building new infrastructure.
Right, exactly. And President Trump said at the end of last week he wants that money that they gave California for the high-speed rail. He wants it back. But the governor out there said, nope.
Hey, and the taxpayers should get it, too. Have it go right back to the taxpayers, not federal coffers.
Don't hold your breath. All right, Maddie Duppler, thank you very much for joining us live
today. Good to see you.
All right. Meanwhile, 820 here in New York City, Democrats is forced to scrap the project over safety and battery life concerns. It's now suing the bus maker. Next, 50 feet. That's how high firefighters climb to rescue a mountain lion stuck in a tree. Firefighters safely tranquilized the mountain lion, brought it down with a rescue harness near a home in California. It has now been released back into the wild. And finally, $1. That's the value of the coin that senators hope to honor the Bush family with. A newly introduced bill would mint coins honoring former President George Herbert Walker Bush and First Lady Barbara Bush, who both died last year. And that is some of the news. Ainsley and Brian.
All right, Steve, President Trump declaring a national emergency and vowing to secure our southern border. Many Democrats and some in the media were quick to say it's fake. National emergency, no big deal.
First of all, it's not an emergency, what's happening at the border.
There's just simply no emergency there.
Unquestionably not a national emergency.
All hands on deck to refuse this president these fake emergency powers.
A national emergency to solve his manufactured crisis.
There is no national emergency.
Right. With his fake national emergency.
By declaring this fake national emergency.
Our next guest, an angel mom, had a front row seat at the president's address, holding her son's picture and his remains in a small urn. Sabine Durden is the director and founding member of Advocates for Victims of Illegal Alien Crime, and she joins us now. Thank you for being with us. What's your reaction when you hear, good morning, what's your reaction when you hear, you were there in the Rose Garden, and then you heard a lot of Democrats, you heard a lot of the media, a lot of the press saying that this is all, there's no emergency, there's no crisis?
It's absolutely an emergency. It's actually a big crisis because we have illegals still flooding over the borders, unannounced, unchecked. And every day at the Rio Grande Valley, for instance, last week, on one day, they had 1,200 illegals just coming through and claiming asylum. Yes, it is a big crisis, and the president is right for what he did.
You got invited to the Oval Office. You had a chance to spend time with the president. If I'm to understand our producer's notes, you really felt he was sincerely trying to help everybody there and represent you. You also had an experience with Jim Acosta. What was that like?
Oh, that was, besides being with the president, that was my second favorite part of it. Acosta would have ignored us, angel moms. He would have just packed up. But I got up real quick and accosted him and called him out on his lies and asked him when he's going to have us on. And as you notice, I'm not standing next to him because I didn't want to be his little prop for a 30-second shot. He owes angel moms, a lot of us. He owes us a real interview because CNN had me on maybe 3 years ago. 3 years, nothing, no angel mom. And it doesn't have to be me, it can be anybody. But he makes it about himself. And when I told him what I felt and how I felt about him, he again talked about himself, how much he loved us and put his hand over his heart and how he felt for us. And then he turned it into, well, the president calls us fake news. And I told him, yeah, I agree with him because he is.
Yeah, he felt he was condescending.
Yes, he was, very much so.
Tell us about your son for the folks at home that aren't familiar with your story.
Dominic was the love of my life, my only child. He was 30 years old. We called him German Chocolate. He was working for the Riverside Sheriff's Department as a 911 dispatcher, and he was also a pilot working for the fire department. And on July 12, 2012, at 5:45 in the morning, he was on his way to work on his motorcycle when an illegal alien with 2 felonies, 2 DUIs, and he received probation each time, turned his unlicensed and unregistered truck right in front of Dominic, killed him instantly. And the hardest part was that the DA and the judge in Riverside County, California, they knew him, gave him a deal of misdemeanor without gross negligence, and he received 9 months, 5-year probation, and served only 35 days.
Wow.
The call no mother wants to receive.
All right, Sabine, thank you very much. Appreciate it. We'll stay on top of this. And I know the president will, too. 31 minutes before the top of the hour. Meanwhile, a state trooper jumps into action to save 3 kids trapped inside a sinking truck. The heroic rescue caught on camera. We'll share it.
Plus, you have seen his patriotic artwork all over our studio. And now, Steve Penley is about to reveal a new President's Day painting. Isn't that beautiful? It's your President's Day shot of the morning. You have seen his patriotic paintings all over Fox and Friends in our green room and all over the walls.
But I've never seen this before. Today, artist Steve Penley is back creating another work of art for us. How about every single president up until this one? Steve, welcome back.
Oh, thanks. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Did this
Love
take
to
a
be here.
long time? It's unbelievable.
It took a long time, and there's a lot of weird hairdos and a lot of weird fashion trends. You know, one thing about seeing all the presidents at once is you can see how ties have changed over the years.
Absolutely. They got the look of the times.
So,
also, do you have a favorite to paint in particular?
Well, you know, I've always been partial to Reagan, and then the cliches are always good, too. You know, Washington and Lincoln. And basically, whatever resonates with the public the most is what I like to paint, because I like to have a, common bond with the viewer.
Right. So why the patriotic themes? How did you start painting that?
Well, I started talking to my little brothers who are younger than I am, and they think we live in the worst country in the world. Oh, God, they're going to kill me for saying this on TV, but they and their generation think this is the worst country in the world, and that we're responsible for everything negative in the world. And I was shocked when I heard the extent of it, so I just started gearing all of my subject matter towards American icons, and so I'm just trying to build up the image of America again.
Right.
And so I'll single-handedly be responsible for rebuilding America. No,
Go ahead. We see it everywhere.
Yeah.
And this is all in the Treasury Department, right?
It's in the Federal Reserve Board.
Federal Reserve Board.
Yeah.
In Washington, D.C. All
Yeah.
right. Well,
they won't let me in to see it, but it's there.
If people want to learn more about you, what's your website?
Oh my gosh, they're going to kill me. Penley.
Is it stevepenley.com?
So
Just
Steve,
Google Steve
Penley. Google Steve Penley and it comes up.
All right, good.
That's what I do.
Find out more. That's good.
You Google yourself.
Should we just change the
Steve, the whole After the Show is going to be just you talking about the colors and what goes into those presidents. Is that all right?
That's my favorite subject.
All right, great. Fantastic.
Okay, PenleyArtCo.com.
That's
Our
it?
producers are telling us.
Oh, okay.
All right, and we got
There it is right
underneath
there.
you. All right, fantastic. Meanwhile, if you wonder where Steve is, so are we. We understand it's time for presidential quizzing of the American people located in New York City.
That's right. But here's the thing, Ainsley and Brian. Today is President's Day, and usually here at the Rockefeller Center station, there would be people just streaming out. But it's a federal holiday, and people are sleeping in. Luckily for us, our friends from Alabama brought a history club. So anyway, all right, and you're the teacher, right?
I am the teacher.
Okay, so you should get every one of our presidential trivia questions right.
I don't know about that.
All right, so everybody, you can all, first of all, tell us your history club. Where are you from?
We're from Sardis City, Alabama. All my students are from Sardis High School. I take them somewhere every year, and this is our first trip to the Big Apple.
Okay, and look, kids, you're televised. All right, here's the first question. If you think you know the answer, just hold up your hand, all right? Here it is. Which U.S. president collects Spider-Man and Conan the Barbarian comic books? Which president collects those comic books?
Dead or alive?
Alive. You thought this was going to be about the Constitution or something. Barack Obama.
Okay.
Who knew that? All right. Which president was the shortest and lightest at 5'4"? We were talking about this earlier. What president? Very short for president. Will come on over here as well. Any ideas? Oh, come on. Take a guess.
I have no idea.
Well, what does that say right there?
James Madison.
That's exactly right. Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right. You know what? Maybe we need visual aid. So, hold on to that. All right, so I've got here paddles, all right? And we've got 4 different presidents, right? So ironically, which president never actually lived in Washington?
It was George Washington.
George Washington is right, and you get this lovely parting gift. All right. Which president is regarded as the principal author of the Declaration of Independence?
They all know.
Okay.
Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson.
You get the Thomas Jefferson. Congratulations. Are we on camera right now?
Yes.
Oh, look at that.
I just want you to know, this girl right here, when there's a breaking news on Fox, she sends it to me.
Oh, good job.
She wants to make sure that I've seen it, and I'm like, I saw it, and then we discuss what's happening in the world.
All right, one more. Who wrote the Gettysburg Address and delivered it? All right.
Abraham Lincoln.
All right, very good. There you go. And who served the longest term as President of the United States? Ladies and gentlemen, all at once.
FDR!
All right. Woo! That's awesome. There you go. All right. So, Ainsley and Brian, on President's Day, what we have learned is that the city of New York pretty much asleep, but the people of Alabama are making a lot of racket on the 6th Avenue.
And I'm glad you asked him questions as a group. It's not as intimidating.
Yeah, absolutely.
No one wants to be embarrassed.
You don't
on
have to
national
phone a
television.
friend next to you.
Right, exactly.
All right. All right, so Steve will be back eventually. Jillian is somewhere safe.
Yes, I am. I am upstairs, and it is very safe. Good morning. Let's get you caught up on your news that we're following, starting with this. 4 of the 5 officers wounded in the Aurora, Illinois plant shooting are out of the hospital. The other is expected to survive. More than 1,000 people came together yesterday at an emotional prayer vigil. 5 people were killed after a coworker opened fire. He was called in to be fired. He was shot and killed by police. An Ohio Performing Arts Center is now apologizing for offering a Shoot the President Nerf party.
Yes.
I don't know.
Find that out.
I don't know. She had a very good seat because she's with us. All right. And that got a lot of publicity. All right. Good job. Thank you very much, Jillian. But we're not done tossing to famous anchors.
What did it say in the viewfinder? Toss to Janice Dean. That's right. I'm glad you told them. Hi, you guys. How are you? Happy President's Day. Ladies, what are your names?
Stuart. Dean Larson.
Where are you from?
Charlotte.
Oh my gosh, can you do the weather for me? Go.
It's cold and rainy.
Yeah! That was amazing. Let's take a look at the big maps to see if she's right. And she's right. 36 here in New York City. We had a little bit of rain in the forecast here. Very cold across the northern plains and the Great Lakes, where we are seeing the next winter storm that's going to develop over the next 24 to 48 hours. So we need you to pay close attention if you live in the eastern third of the country. Here it comes. More winter weather in store. Real quick. Hi to your dad, George, right?
Yes. Hi, Dad. How you doing? We're having fun.
Wave to everybody. Hey. Yay, we love you. Thank you for coming to Fox and Friends.
All right.
Good group out there.
It's not too bad out. It's like 50 degrees, so it's kind of cool. Meanwhile, 18 minutes before the top of the hour, in just a few hours, President Trump will warn about the dangers of socialism in a speech targeting Venezuela, and it'll be in Miami. We'll preview that speech shortly.
Plus, he's cooked for Presidents Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, and his son, George W. Now we are getting a taste of their favorites. That chef is cooking for us live on President's Day.
We're giving this life everything we've got and then some. It ain't always.
The president is heading to Miami to highlight the dangers of socialism.